I didn't have to even say OH. Good evening. Good evening to you all. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for joining us for EHE's inaugural Legacy Lectures. This is something we have been wanting to do for a while, to recognize our faculty who have had distinguished careers in our community. We are convening today to honor and explore the rich legacies of our distinguished faculty emerita who have helped shape the College of Education and Human Ecology and contribute to the betterment of the local and global communities we serve. Tonight's event is a part of Experience EHE, which is dedicated to highlighting the core values of the college and showcasing our collective impact in our research and scholarship, our support for students, and our connection to and collaboration with community partners. One of EHE's tradition is to feature art created by students in one of our local communities. I hope you all had the opportunity to stop by the reception upstairs on your way to see the event, to see the wonderful pieces created by students at the Berkwick Alternative PK-8 School. Please join me in thanking the students, their teachers, Ms. Wanda Mays and Dr. Terry Martinger and Francis Penn, retired teachers and volunteers. This partnership was led by EDGE, EHE's Office of Equity, Diversity, and Global Engagement. Special thanks to Carlotta Penn and Ryan Randell for their leadership and engagement with the teachers and students at Burswick. This evening event kicks off a special week of our college. There are opportunities to serve by volunteering at the Sophie Rogers Library or the Schottenbaum Family Center kitchen. You can also form a team to compete in a variety of activities that we are engaged in. For our inaugural Legacy Lecture, we chose the theme, It Begins with Us. It begins with you and you, which recognizes that change begins with each individual person choosing to make a difference. It also reflects EHE's commitment to celebrating and recognizing the contribution of those who came before to establish strong foundations upon which to build future progress, upon whose shoulders we stand today. Our presenters this evening are faculty emerita from our college. Dr. David Bloome, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Teaching and Learning. Please stand for a moment so we can applaud you. And Dr. Cynthia Buettner, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Human Sciences. Both presenters embody the ideals of the college as champions who are dedicated to improving education. In practice, policy, advocacy, and research, and more importantly, in paving the way for others to follow. The format for this evening's program begins with each speaker delivering a lecture in the style of a TED Talk. So you're not bound to stand behind this podium if you do not want to do that. Following each individual's talk, both speakers will join me on stage for a moderated discussion. And if time permits, we will invite questions from our participants. I would now like to invite Dr. Stephanie Power-Carter to the podium to introduce Dr. Bloome.
Hello. Hello. Great. It is an honor to introduce Dr. David Bloome, an extraordinary and prolific scholar. And I have to say, the 5 minutes that I've been given won't allow me to fully capture his stature in the field and his many accomplishments, so I'll give you a few highlights. He has edited and co-authored over 20 books, published over 100 articles and book chapters, not including blogs, book reviews, and audio-video publications. He has served in multiple leadership capacities. In EHE, he has served as an Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs, the founder and director for the Center for Discourse Analysis and Video Ethnography, formerly known as CVETA. He's the founder and director of the Columbus Area Writing Project. Nationally, he served as the president for the National Council of Teachers of English. He's chaired the AERA Publication Committee, program chair of AERA's Division G, co-chair of NCTE's Jewish Caucus. He's also founded a journal, the Journal of Linguistics and Education, and he has served as a co-editor for the Reading and Research Quarterly Journal, and he's currently one of the co-editors for Research and the Teaching of English. He is also a highly acclaimed scholar. He has received the John G. Gumperis Lifetime Award, Distinguished Scholar Award from the National Conference on Research in Language and Literacy. He's a member of the Reading Hall of Fame, and these are just a few of his accomplishments. Now, if you know Dr. David Bloome, or as I call him Dave, you know he's probably fidgeting in his seat and at that list of accomplishments and probably rolling his eyes a little bit. And I've known him for about 20 years, and I know he'd probably say something like, I didn't accomplish all that by myself. While his many achievements are remarkable, what is most impressive about Dr. Bloome is his ability to remain humble. In fact, if you ever get a chance to talk with him about his journey, he will rattle off a long list of women scholars who mentored and supported him. And he will say something like, I'm here because they opened doors and sometimes even had to push me through them. And I can personally say that Dr. David Bloome has been a good steward of their legacies. It wasn't too many years ago. Okay, well, maybe longer than I'd like to admit. I can recall a moment when I was in graduate school and he was my advisor. He probably doesn't remember this. It had been a long week. It was Friday, and I was feeling the weight of being a first-generation Black woman graduate student at the very prestigious Peabody College at Vanderbilt. And I bumped into him on my way out down the spirally stairs that led to the atrium in the Social Religious Building, also known as the Wyatt Center now, I think. He asked me how I was doing, and I said something like, I'm not sure I belong here. And he paused and simply said, you do, and proceeded to share some of his own story and his wisdom to reassure me. To me, that memory is reflective of who he is. It's not just his long list of accolades and accomplishments that make him such an outstanding scholar. It is his ability to bring people along with him as he is engaging in research and scholarship. His ability to pause, mentor, freely give his time. Now, it's true, he can be direct sometimes, and although rare, to use one of my son's words, he can get a little spicy, especially if he feels that you're going down the wrong, path. But even then, it comes from a place of care. Much like his scholarship, he centers people. And one of his favorite quotes by Raymond Williams says, a definition of language is always, implicitly or explicitly, a definition of human beings in the world. It is through engaging and being that he continues to contribute to the field of language and literacy and challenges us to think about our languaging, how we use it and what we do with it, challenging us to have a deeper understanding of what is happening here in an effort to make schools, communities, and our educational system better and more equitable. Dr. Bloome's body of work, as well as his scholarly commitments to the field and his passion, continues to be impactful, and I, along with the field, are better because of it. I introduce to you now a scholar, a colleague, a mentor, and a dear friend, Dr. David Bloome.
Dr. Luthi, Dr. Snyder, Dr. Power Carter, Dr. Buettner, colleagues, students, friends, and family, thank you for the honor of inviting me to be part of the inaugural EHE Legacy Lectures. The task you gave us was to talk briefly, to reflect on our academic journey and legacy, and offer our perspectives on future directions. I suspect that you have underestimated how difficult a task this is. First, as everyone in my family, my students, and the people I have worked with would tell you, I am incapable of speaking briefly about anything. But I will try. See if I can work this. More importantly, the difficulty of the task is that I do not see myself as an individual actor. It is not just that I work with others, but more so that I see myself as part of an intellectual history with beginnings long before I was born, and that will continue long after I am gone. Among Jews, we call such a view dor vidor, which is Yiddish and also Hebrew for generation to generation. It is our responsibility not just to build on past generations, but to bring them into our lives, and it is also our responsibility to bring those of future generations in our lives, just as they will bring us into theirs. So what I will talk about tonight is an intellectual history, of which I have been a small part, an intellectual history that will continue long after I grow too weary. That intellectual history is often called the linguistic turn in the social sciences. And at its heart is the recognition that our language and how we use it creates the social realities in which we live, struggle, love, hate, and educate. And yet, we are mostly oblivious to our language and how we use it. If we were to take the linguistic turn in the social sciences seriously, if we were to closely examine our language and how we use it, and even more so, if we were to teach our children and our children's children to closely examine our language and how we use it, some of the most trenchant problems we struggle to understand would become apparent to us. But perhaps more importantly, we would have in our hands the miracles of ordinary everyday life. At the end of my talk, I'll come back to everyday miracles. Let me shift away from such heavy language, and if you are willing, I'd like to ask you to help me with a little experiment that I hope will give you some insight into what I and others involved in the linguistic turn find compelling. What I would like to ask you to do is please pair up with someone nearby you, sitting you're next to, and then I'd like you to pretend for a moment that you are taking notes and that it's very important for you to take notes. I know that's a big imagination that you're doing that, but pretend for a moment that you're doing that. But in taking these notes, your pen has run out of ink, and you do not have another pen or pencil with you, but you want to take these notes. Please ask the person next to you if you could borrow a pen from them. Go ahead. Do so. If it's maybe somebody in front of you, please ask them. Okay. Now, remember what you said and how you said it. Okay, now we're coming to the second part of the experiment. You still need a pen to take those notes, but the person sitting next to you now You have to use your imagination. The person sitting next to you is your 5-year-old daughter or granddaughter or niece. Please go ahead and ask your 5-year-old to borrow a pen or a pencil. Go ahead. Okay? All right. Oh, okay. I'm going to bet that you did not use the same words when you asked the first time. I'll bet that both your tone of voice and the words you used and even how you used your body changed. Why? Every time we use words, every time we talk, every time we interact with someone, it is not just the content we are communicating, borrowing a pen. We are performing who we are and who we take the other person to be. We are also communicating a relationship to that other person, as well as the place we're in. We are communicating race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, age, and generation, and this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we're communicating. And this is empirically so, as you have just demonstrated. And this is also true in our written language. Here's an excerpt from McGuffey's First Reader from 1879, one of the first reading primers. I'll read it to you, and you can take a look at all the social work going on. We have come to the last lesson in the book. We have finished the first reader. You can now read all the lessons in it and can write them on your slates. Have you taken good care of your book? Children should always keep their book neat and clean. Are you not glad to be ready for a new book? Your parents are very kind to send you to school. If you are good and if you try to learn, your teacher will love you and you will please your parents. We could spend hours examining the language and how it is used in this written document, but we can easily see that the author has assumed a persona of a teacher and has positioned the reader as a child student, with parents who are kind in sending their child to school. This passage is not just about finishing the book. It is about who good children are, about the morality they should have, about how they should relate to others, and the asserted nature of the world in which they live. I've spent a lot of time in classrooms listening to the spoken and written languaging that teachers and students do, especially when they interact with each other. In one of the classrooms, I noticed that the elementary school children spent a lot of time copying letters, filling in worksheets, and drawing pictures the way teachers and students wanted the pictures to be drawn. And when I started looking in secondary school classrooms, I saw the analogous kinds of writing. Students wrote essays, but they wrote them using the models they were given by the school and using words that they were given by the school. I called such writing practices text reproduction. Text reproduction also occurs in reading, such as what happens when children have to read out loud and the teacher corrects the child when the child does not exactly reproduce the text in the language of the school, typically standard English. Text reproduction is not simply an issue of limited cognitive engagement. It is also an issue of telling children who they are, what place they are in, how they should relate to each other, to others, and to the institution, what their future is, and that the words they write do not belong to them. It is a form of silencing that, when done again and again and again and again, day after day after day, is an erasure of the child. I worked with a series of teachers in different grades to try and figure out a way within the context of schooling to shift away from text reproduction to text production. For lots of reasons, it's not so easy. We taught students to be ethnographers of their own communities, to be critical discourse analysts of the language all around them, to engage in inquiry projects in which there were no known or correct answers, only wonder. All the time we focus not just on the cognitive engagement, that's the easy part. The harder part is focusing on and addressing the social work being done with and by words and how they are used. One of the things about life in school, in any social institution, is that it has to look like what it is. A classroom lesson has to look like a classroom lesson, and student learning has to look like student learning, if you will. Teachers and students have to use their words to construct an event that looks like doing a classroom lesson. They have to perform doing school. In classroom after classroom, there is evidence again and again that teachers and students orient to performing lessons, performing schools, as opposed to actually engaging in substantive learning. In one lesson we saw, before the teacher gave the students a test on 10 items from their study of the southeastern United States, the teacher went over the answers to all 10 questions and then immediately gave them the test, which almost all of them failed. You might conclude that there's something wrong with the students or something wrong with the teacher. In fact, when we closely examined the languaging they did, we found that they oriented to doing the lesson, performing it, as if they were actors in a play who knew all their lines but did not understand the play they were in or what their lines meant. We name that phenomena procedural display. Teachers and students displaying to each other the procedures that count as doing a lesson. And we saw it over and over and over again in all kinds of schools with all kinds of teachers at all grade levels. What procedural display gets at is a kind of alienation that we, educators and students, create through the language we use and how we use it. Breaking through that alienation is difficult and can be dangerous. In one high school classroom with an extraordinarily wonderful and caring teacher, the students were organized into peer groups to get feedback from each other on the essays they had just written. In one group we video recorded, one of the young women began by saying to her friends in the group, "Do you guys ever feel like you're kind of trying to be like everyone else because you don't want to be who you really are? Because I do that all the time." And the 3 other students in that group did not take up what she said. Instead, they went straight to the revision task they had been assigned, ignoring this young woman's attempt to break through the alienation of schooling. Formulaic writing, such as writing the 5-paragraph argumentative essay, is a form of text reproduction and is a form of alienation. Working with my brilliant colleagues George Newell, Alan Hervilla, and Stu Jung Lin, numerous doctoral students, and over 40 teachers in the central Ohio area, we sought to undermine the 5-paragraph essay and replace it with what we came to call arguing to learn, and later we called it dialogic literary argumentation. While we were certainly interested in changing the nature of the cognitive task, at the heart of what we were doing was to change who the students and teachers were, who they were to each other, how they defined learning, knowledge, and knowing. And all this change rests on how teachers and students use words and what words they use. There is no formula we can give them, no checklist, only an intellectual framework grounded in the linguistic term. Over the years, as we were examining language and how it was used in classroom conversation, we were continuously confronted by how teachers and students were constructing personhood. Personhood is a well-known concept in anthropology, but rare in education. Personhood is a shared cultural concept of what a person is, what kinds of people there are, what the nature of people is taken to be, and what rights and responsibilities are inherent to people. Personhood is not an individual view of what a person is, it is a shared cultural concept. What we kept seeing again and again was that teachers and students were constructing shared definitions of personhood. Often the definitions of personhood they constructed reflected the dominant definitions of personhood in society at large. People are distinct individuals with a race and gender hierarchically organized. The definitions of personhood they constructed often included assumptions about motivation, emotions, and what psychological and psychoanalytical characteristics people had. They constructed these definitions of personhood through their talk and through their writing and reading. The definitions of personhood they constructed were all the more powerful because they were constructed just below the level of consciousness, implicit in all they said, wrote, and read. Perhaps the most powerful and most consequential thing they were learning in school was a shared definition of personhood that was invisible to them. But on occasion, there were moments when their definitions of personhood were challenged. Sometimes they were challenged by a teacher, sometimes they were challenged by other students. In one of the classrooms in which we spent several years, and we were there nearly daily, we saw a teacher continuously challenge the students' conceptions of personhood. We saw some of the students take up the teacher's stance of continuously challenging how to define personhood and keeping open to other ways to define person, reflecting on both their own experiences and the experiences of others. I started by talking about door to door, generation to generation, and the linguistic turn in the social sciences. I asked you to engage in an experiment so that you could yourself engage in the kind of inquiry and thinking that the linguistic turn asks us to do. Our use of words and language is not the surface coating of something more substantive. It is the social reality we create together. It is what gives us the lives we lead. From generation to generation, we take up the words of others, adapt them to what we have learned and what we are learning, pulling the past and the future into the present, which is what this event, the EHA Legacy Series, is meant to do. At the beginning of my talk, I mentioned that if we were to teach our children and their children to closely examine our language and how we use it, some of the most trenchant problems we struggle to understand would become apparent to us. But perhaps more importantly, we would have in our hands the miracles of ordinary, everyday life. Let me explain what I mean by using a quotation from Elie Wiesel that continues to inspire me. As a Jew, I believed in miracles. Our survival is just that. But according to the Talmud, miracles ceased with the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. Since then, miracles of another sort, daily and ordinary, occur before our eyes. I speak to someone who understands what I say. Isn't that a miracle? I love someone who loves me. Isn't that a miracle? Any encounter involves the miraculous. We find it also in the connection between the event and the story of the event, and in the hidden meaning of that story. The miraculous is not beyond us or outside of our classrooms. It is waiting for us to give it words and language. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Lang. It is an incredible honor to introduce Dr. Cynthia Buettner, not only because she is a researcher that I deeply admire, who has made a tremendous impact on the field of early care and education, as well as the field of risk behavior in early adulthood, but also because she has had a profound impact on me personally. I also promised her and myself that I would try very hard not to make either of us cry during this introduction, and I'm really going to do my best here. But Cynthia, in many ways, is one of my key academic parents, if you will. She's taught me everything from how to conduct a quality focus group, to how to put together a funded grant proposal, to how to stop and enjoy great food and wine at research conferences, an essential task. So if the audience will indulge me for a moment, I would like to take this opportunity to share a bit about the beautiful human that Cynthia is before I turn to the more traditional introduction that one typically hears in academic settings. During my time with Cynthia, I witnessed and experienced her extreme generosity on countless occasions. If she saw you working hard, bringing your skills to the table, and knew your motives were about making the world a better place, she did whatever was within her power to help you succeed or progress forward. Cynthia would listen to her staff and her work colleagues, and she knew how to individualize her support to help them produce their very best work. I remember a key example when I was ruminating over a mistake that I made. She knew that I had already learned the lesson I needed to from that experience, so she sent me the link to the song Let It Go from Frozen, and she sang it to me in the office, and actually she made me sing it with her. I said I wouldn't cry. She knew that that was the most helpful thing for me in the moment, that I needed to accept that we all make mistakes, and we get to try again tomorrow with our refined set of knowledge. Cynthia always thinks about those most underserved or most marginalized by systems and structures, and she is the best person to have as your brainstorming buddy to consider the next strategic steps to take. I still call on her whenever I'm stuck, whenever I need someone to check my thinking. Watching Cynthia, I learned so many things about what good leadership looks like. Things like ensuring you create lots of safe spaces for dissent and new ideas, about attending to your team's own well-being, and with Cynthia, that often meant delicious meals, which I cannot replicate, but also modeling your own hard work and humility. Working so closely with Cynthia is the gift of a lifetime. She created a culture where the team wanted to bring their best in the service of the mission. She would stop and remind us with gratitude that we are changing the world. And I'm indebted to Cynthia in more ways than I could properly articulate if you gave me all evening to stand up here. But I am most thankful for the ways that she constantly demonstrated how to be an ethical, caring, and engaged member of academia. Now I will transition to the more formal introduction. So Dr. Cynthia Buettner is a professor emeritus in our College of Education and Human Ecology. During her tenure here at The Ohio State University, she served as the Director of Research in the former College of Human Ecology, the Chair of our Human Development and Family Science program within the Department of Human Sciences, and as the Director of the Ohio Collaborative, a research and policy analysis center focused on conducting studies to inform local and state policy issues. Dr. Buettner's broad research interests centered on prevention of at-risk behavior and systems of support for vulnerable populations. She had two major lines of funded research. The first was on risk drinking among young adults, and the second focused on early childhood care and education in general, and on early childhood teacher characteristics in particular, with the key goal of her research and translational work aimed at improving children's social-emotional outcomes. She has over 50 published articles and reports and given over 70 presentations and secured more than $21 million in research funding during her tenure here. In 2016, she was recognized by our college for her tremendous research contributions and was awarded the EHE Distinguished Research Award. One of her most notable contributions to the field was the establishment of the Virtual Lab School, an online professional development system for early care and education professionals funded by the U.S. Department of Defense. The Virtual Lab School continues to grow and thrive, and last year alone received over 13.2 million page views. Talk about that legacy. It is no wonder that Cynthia was selected for this inaugural legacy lecture. Her positive impact on the world lives on in her research and her public-facing scholarship, and in all the students and colleagues that she has influenced along her journey. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cynthia Buettner to the stage.
Thank you, Sarah. There you are. As you can tell, Sarah is very generous. She is also smart and kind and really fun to work with. And I'm so glad that our paths crossed. And thank you for not making me totally lose it and cry. She sent me the introduction ahead of time so I could practice crying before I got up here. My thanks also to Dean Pope Davis and all of his staff for this opportunity, and for all of you who are here tonight to see us try this for the first time, these inaugural lectures. So as I reflected on my life and academic legacy in preparation for this talk, I kept coming back to how atypical my particular journey was, but also how that atypicalness, if I can coin a word, was relevant to understanding who I was, this is going to be a problem, who I was as a researcher and an academic and a faculty member. So I struggled with a little bit on how to articulate all that along with the takeaways that I very much wanted for you as the audience, knowing that some of you were here to see me, probably more of you were here to see Dave, and then knowing that there are some here just because they had to be, and you should know that I've been in your place and I feel your pain. So I'll try not to make it too painful for you. But with the days for practicing quickly counting down, and this being out of my retired professor routine, I began to panic a bit about my speaking performance in a way I have not since I was about 8. And contemplating that led me to want to give you a visual reference for the 8-year-old Cynthia early in her academic life, both as a place to start and to reinforce the connection I want to make for you between child and adult. So here I am with my family, looking, I think, rather resolute in my role as the firstborn child and the oldest sister. Don't you like the cat glasses? The picture also allows me to acknowledge how much my family had to do with my academic success and any impact I may have had on this world. Not only my dear parents, who supported me in whatever endeavor I decided to try, and my siblings, who worked hard and still do to keep me humble, but to the family that was created when I married my husband, Dennis, down here in the front row. He supported me as I finished my bachelor's, we were high school sweethearts, my master's and PhD, and my 2 sons, Dan and Matt, who tolerated their mom as a small business owner, a graduate student, and then a faculty member. As a human development and family science professor, I know how very lucky I am in this part of my life. I was also lucky to be influenced by 3 professors in particular at Heidelberg College, where I did my undergrad. My classics advisor, Frank Kramer, who was one of the smartest, wisest, and kindest men I've ever met, and Leon Langendorfer and Ruth Bacon, 2 kick-ass, if I can say it, women in the speech and theater department. Each of them, in their own way, taught me as much about life as they did about subject matter. And they made me think, because they did the job so very well, that I would like to be a professor someday. A remarkable thought, as I was a first-generation college student before that was a label. And even more remarkable that my grandparents only had an 8th grade education. After graduating with my BA and my teaching certificate in Latin and Greek and speech and theater, which, this might not surprise you, but it did me at the time, turned out to be less than ideal subjects when it came to job placement. I eventually took a job with the county juvenile court back home in Northwest Ohio, teaching in a program that was designed to divert status offenders, that is, kids who had charges of truancy or running away or being unruly from incarceration. Yes, we did used to lock up kids for that. It was a 40-hour-a-week, 52-week-a-year job that paid $11,000, and for which I had no relevant preparation in my undergraduate education work. To say that it was challenging is an understatement. But this was the job that awakened to me to the fact that The world and life is very different for so many children. I grew up in a home where money was always tight, but we had the necessities, and we had stability, and we had some structure. But with this job, I made home visits with this job, I saw poverty that was painfully real. I saw little children that were sleeping on bare floors with dead rats in the corners, families contending with addiction, abuse, and unplanned pregnancies. And I saw a lot of social structures that made it hard for those folks to get ahead. I loved working with those kids, but despite loving that job, I had to leave it after the birth of our first son because I could not find affordable and safe, let alone quality, childcare in our community. A problem, as I'll discuss in a bit, that still exists more than 40 years later. The next dozen years were ones where I turned a hobby into a home-based business. I made quilts, and I dyed fabric, and I volunteered with the Art Association, the schools, the soup kitchen. Eventually, when both of the boys were in school and the lack of childcare was no longer such a barrier, I applied for a position as director of a food pantry, but lost out on that job because I didn't have a master's degree. Employment's hard in Northwest Ohio. And that propelled me to pursue a graduate degree at Bowling Green, picked not because of all the reasons a graduate student should pick a school, but because it was the only university that was within a reasonable driving distance of where we lived, 1 hour each way. I knew nothing about how grad school worked. I just sent in my application to the address in the catalog that I got in the library, which was before the days of the internet. Last minute, calling those 3 Heidelberg professors 17 years after I graduated and asking them to write letters of recommendation for me, which they did within a day. When the chair of the grad committee at Bowling Green called me to tell me I was accepted, I was surprised. Not that I was accepted because for some unknown reason I thought that that was a given, but because he asked me, wouldn't I like an assistantship? That he wanted to give me one. It would cover tuition and they would give me a stipend for teaching. I had no idea there was such a thing, so I had not asked for it. Even today, I'm embarrassed, particularly having been a grad studies chair in our department. I'm embarrassed by the ignorance that I had then. I was good at grad school, and the faculty at BG urged me to apply to the doctorate program. But we had a chance to move to Columbus at the same time, where there seemed to be more opportunities for our family as a whole. And so we moved to Columbus, where I ended up working at a nonprofit serving the public schools in Franklin County, which provided programming around school reform, school safety, and at-risk kids. It was in connection with a project that I was leading around at-risk youth that I met David Andrews, who was a former dean here in this college. In my first attempt at networking, which was kind of a new concept at the time, I met with him post-project to see if there might be any positions at the university, trying to get closer to my goal. And David said no. But he suggested that I work on my doctorate with him as my advisor. When Dennis and I talked about it that night, I told him no job, but an offer to go back to school. But I also didn't know how we could possibly afford for me to be a research assistant. And in his ever-supportive way, Dennis said I shouldn't pass up the opportunity. We'd find a way to make it work. I did not know at the time that it was unusual for a dean to recruit a grad student. Again, some higher ed ignorance on my part. But I did very soon, have a very large portfolio of projects and eventually an administrative position in the college. Among other things, I ran a National Institute of Health grant that David and I wrote to examine barriers to mental health professionals adopting evidence-based treatments. And another NIH grant we wrote based on my dissertation looking at celebratory riots and binge drinking in college students. And I also took on KidCore, an AmeriCorps-funded project we developed that paired OSU work-study students with preschool children in Head Start centers. The focus of that project was to support young children's pre-literacy and social-emotional skills. Each year of the 6 that KidCore was in operation, we trained and placed between 80 and 90 undergrads in preschool classrooms. On days when the world seems a bit hopeless to me, I like to think about the 500-plus alumni and the more than 1,000 preschoolers that were touched by that program. I'm hoping that the ripples are still going out through the universe. David also asked me to step in as a director of the center in the college focused on state and local educational issues. I think he got his money for his research assistant. Among the various projects was an evaluation of Step Up to Quality, Ohio's effort to increase the quality of childcare in the state. It was another connection with early childhood. And then I joined, I missed that slide, and then I joined the Human Development and Family Science faculty. It's really terrible when you mess up the name of your department. I retained my portfolio of research and outreach projects and the policy work, and then added the responsibilities that come with a faculty appointment. So despite my desire to be a professor emerging when I was 20, I was now a very late in life academic, earning my doctorate at 50 and becoming an assistant professor at 53. I still don't know what I was thinking taking on menopause and the tenure process at the same time. My work evaluating Step Up to Quality connected me with others in the US conducting research in this space, and I realized that I had settled into my final focal point. There was something poetic, I thought, in my studying childcare, which is the thing that I could not get when I needed it. And here's where I'm going to shift from telling you about my non-traditional path to the professorship, which I was hoping would help you understand what motivates me, while it also allowed me to honor all of those who supported and influenced what I have been able to accomplish. I want to shift to what I want you to think about, and I really want you to act upon as a result of investing this short time with me. I want to talk with you about the importance of early care and education so that you will become advocates for our children and the adults who care for them. Because the research is strong, from neuroscientists, medical researchers, and developmental psychologists about the importance of early childhood experiences on one's life trajectory. This is because the brain has the most plasticity or capacity for change during those early years, making these years an important period in both opportunity and in vulnerability. It follows that it is easier and much less costly to form strong brain circuits during the early years than it is to try to intervene or fix them later. If we want to address achievement gaps, it's here where we can have the most impact. We also know that chronic, unrelenting stress in early childhood can be toxic to the developing brain. On the left of this slide, you can see a typical neuron with lots of connections, and on the right, the impact of toxic stress, illustrating why it is critical to have highly skilled and socially, emotionally competent teachers working with our youngest children. Research has also led to the discovery of individual differences in children's susceptibilities to both negative and positive environmental exposures, and that 1 in 5 children show a greater susceptibility to environmental adversity. Children whose biology, their genes, makes them highly susceptible, think the difference between orchids and dandelions, do much better in supportive social contexts, but far worse in stressful ones. And this interaction has been shown in research looking at high and low conflict households and important to the work of educators in high and low stress classrooms. But despite the research documenting the importance of this period, Generally, the quality of early care and education in the U.S. is lower than what we need, particularly for children aged birth through 3. In the U.S., almost a third of those working with children under the age of 4 do not have a high school diploma. Only 19% have any kind of a bachelor's degree, and just a little over all of the centers, a third of all the centers, accept children less than 1 year old. Meaning, think back to my slide where we looked at where it's important, meaning that more infants and toddlers are in home-based care where there are fewer high-quality settings. And nationally, children from vulnerable households are less likely to be in center-based care. High-quality care is what we want for all children, but for the orchid child or those from vulnerable backgrounds, high-quality care is critical, where it can help to buffer adverse experiences. And on the flip side, low-quality care can actually add to a child's stress burden. This means that we must think about not only the training, but the well-being of the teachers. Research tells us, here we go. All right, folks, this is the entertainment part of the lecture. One more. There we go. All right. Research tells us that about 10% of caregivers are depressed, and a large study of Head Start teachers found that the rate of depression among those teachers was 25%. And we know that the rates of stress are very high. And this is from my research. Outside of the effects of education and training, teachers' well-being influences how teachers manage classrooms, how they interact with children, how they relate with the families of those children, and whether they stay in the field or not. We must also recognize, and this is usually the part when I get going, people threaten to give me a soapbox, but we also must recognize that those who work with young children are faced with the evidence that the work they do, in general, is not valued in our culture. Despite the mounting evidence of the importance of having quality care for children, there has been little real increase in child care workers' wages. In the richest country in the world, we pay non-farm animal caretakers, the people who care for our dogs and cats when we go on vacation, more than we pay those who care for our children. Child care teachers are grossly underpaid and underbenefited, as evidenced by the fact that over 40% of them qualify for some type of government assistance. Yet child care costs amount to nearly 10% of the average family's income, or 40% higher than what the Department of Health and Human Services defines as affordable. Lower income families pay an even higher percentage of their income on child care. The primary public funding source for children is a federal and state partnership program that requires states matching funds to access the federal dollars that are intended to help eligible families. However, the lack of funding from the states means that this program reaches only 1 in 7 eligible children. And many families who need support paying for child care do not meet the eligibility criteria. For example, a family of 3 making just slightly more than $32,000 in annual income would not qualify for assistance in 13 states in this country. The U.S. ranks 3rd to last when it comes to the percentage of gross domestic product in public spending for families and young children. Infuriatingly, funding for child care that would have helped U.S. families and our children was stripped out of last year's Inflation Reduction Act during negotiations. My outrage here isn't just about us not doing our best for our children and our families, but there is real long-term cost to our country. Hard-nosed economic researchers, those who work for the Federal Reserve Bank, have calculated that there is there is between $11 and $16 return on every $1 invested in high-quality early childhood education, in higher academic achievement, in higher lifetime earnings, less involvement in crime, reduced healthcare costs. Okay, on a brighter note, one place where the U.S. does have a high-quality child care system, we know how to do it, is in the U.S. military. Under the Obama administration, the Department of Defense sought to leverage the land-grant university system to support military families. And they wanted to upgrade how they were training their child care workers. And I became the principal investigator for the virtual lab school, as Sarah noted, which is a child and youth care professional development system that we developed for the DoD. The opportunity to lead the VLS project placed me where I had always wanted to be, with a foot firmly in the knowledge-generating research world and one in the practical application of research, changing the world one. The VLS has been a powerful collaboration between the team I used to lead, now under the even more capable leadership of my friend Sarah, the child and youth policy leaders in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and the teachers and families in the U.S. military. And there have been dozens of dedicated graduate students, postdocs, technical experts, and other very talented staff members that have contributed to the VLS. From the beginning, our partners at the DoD were committed to this effort being collaborative, it being research-based, and to making the content that we created for them available to the public. As a result, in addition to the almost 2 million professional development hours that the VLS has provided to military child care workers so far, the VLS is being accessed by over 1.5 million users each year. And there is no advertisement for the VLS. And with two projects, VLS Momentum 1 and 2, that we, mostly Sarah, that means, was some Sarah in my pocket, and the current VLS team have piloted an adaptation of the military VLS practice-based coaching system in Columbus centers. And I want to call out Eric Porfelli, who is the Human Sciences Chair, for allowing funds that I had secured for that project to be used beyond my retirement date when our timing was impacted by COVID. Many contributed to my path to the professorship and to any success that I may have had in that role: faculty mentors, colleagues, and some of my department chairs. My deepest gratitude, though, is for my graduate students and postdocs, I did that for you, Eric, who shared in my passion for the work and who are young enough to carry it forward. In particular, Dr. Leni Jun, now an endowed associate professor at UVA, and Dr. Sarah Lang, assistant professor in this college and current PI for the VLS projects. Both are incredible, kick-ass women working to change the world. And as I close, my thanks again to the dean and all of the college staff for giving me this chance to reflect, to you all for listening and for becoming, I'm counting on you, advocates for early childhood and education, and to my family, Dennis, my wonderful husband, I wasn't going to do this, of almost 49 years, my two remarkable sons, Dan and Matt, and their equally remarkable life partners, Netta and Ellen. And last, but certainly not least, my amazing, amazing granddaughter, Moxie. I can hardly wait to see how she changes the world. Thank you.
So thank you both for being here with us on this inaugural event. So I'm going to pepper you with a couple of questions.
Okay.
And we'll go back and forth. You both highlighted the importance of relationships in shaping who you are as scholars, mentors, and as advocates. This is, quite frankly, something that people say a lot. It's all about relationships. What moments or experiences in your career that cemented this central idea for you? And can you give us some examples?
Dave, I'm looking at you first.
Well, I think all of these relationships that we have as we're moving through the education system, both as young and older as well, I think that some of the most important ones are ones we don't even realize are happening at the time when they're happening. They're part of the ongoing, everyday life in which you live. Sometimes they're offhand comments by a teacher or a mentor or a student or a student that you have, right? Or something of that nature. So I think I would be remiss in not mentioning the influence that Judith Green has had on my life and how I see things. Judith was my dissertation advisor and was one of the people who was hardest on me all the time. There were times in which I was absolutely convinced that there was nothing I could do right in Judith's eyes. And I remember one day we were coming back from a conference driving somewhere, and Judith was in the car and I had some doctoral students in the car. We had all gone to the conference together. And I remember in that car, the doctoral students were complaining to Judith about how hard I was on them. And I remember Judith saying to them, "He's not hard on you at all compared to how hard I was on him." And I remember that. And I remember it because it kept in mind that we can have being hard on other people is not the same as being mean or exclusionary. Being hard on people communicates to them that we have high expectations of you. That you can reach and achieve a great deal more than you even realize you are capable of doing. And we have that belief in you that you are able to do that. And I'm looking at Stephanie here. And I thought Stephanie was going to tell this story. And I was so thankful that she didn't, and now I'm going to tell it. I believe it was when we were at Peabody. Stephanie had worked, very, very hard on a paper. That's right? Right? And got the paper, and Stephanie came up to me after she had worked on this paper very hard, and she said, "What did you think?" And I think the words I said to you were, "You can do better." Is that close to what I said? Pretty close to what you... Stephanie then, didn't say anything, went away and produced the incredible work she has produced, right? And then she came and she told me that story about a decade later. And I was totally embarrassed that caused her such angst. But then as I began to reflect on it, and as she talked to me about how important that moment was to her, about the faith that I had in her, beyond the faith that she even had in herself. I hope that's fair to say. And how important that was, and yet, and that's one of those examples.
Cynthia, let me turn to you.
Well, as Dave was talking, I was thinking about, in the process of trying to write this, I thought through all of the, lots of those deep relationships and the conversations that I had. When your last thing made me think about when I showed David the first draft of my dissertation, he said, "Let's go get a muffin." And I knew he'd never asked to take me for a muffin. and I knew we were going to have a conversation about what he was thinking I was going to have to produce. But it also made me, as you were talking, and I was recovering from speaking, it made me think about there's those deep relationships that we have with graduate students and our mentors and everything. But Sarah's heard me tell this story. For a short period of time, I taught an online course for Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. They needed, you had to have a human development and family science credit in order to get into the master's program. So it was totally online. Of course, I never met these students. And about probably a year after I'd had this one student in the class, he wrote to me, because they still had my email address, and he asked if I would be willing to write him a letter of recommendation to get into the master's program at Johns Hopkins into nursing. And, faculty write recommendation letters all the time. And I didn't know him. I had to go back and read his post to have some sense of who I was going to try to construct this letter for him. So I wrote it and I sent it off, and I did not think about it at all. It was one of those very ephemeral sort of things that you engage in. And it was probably, I don't know, maybe a year later, I went to my physical mailbox at the, which never had anything in it that you wanted. They just all the stuff that people put in there. And there was a handwritten little card with an address up in the corner, a return address that I did not recognize. And when I opened it, Sarah knows I cry every time I tell this, there was this beautiful thank you note from this young man who that my recommendation had gotten him, he felt, had gotten him into the nursing program. He had his master's. He was going off to work with Doctors Without Borders. And he just wanted to thank me, that I'd done that. So it is about relationships, but not always how we define them, I think. And again, it's the kind of thing, he happened to thank me, but that also could have happened, somebody could have done something wonderful that you didn't know about. But that sticks with me as we don't always know how our relationships are making a difference in somebody's life.
You are both technically retired. How's that going for you?
I'm looking for my kids because, they left. Yeah. And I think there were multiple opinions on how it's going for me among family and students and so forth. The joking aside for a moment, I think this event, and I want to thank you and the people that envisioned this event, is a wonderful thing to do. And it's wonderful to do in large part because those of us who have spent a lifetime in academia, and some people have spent the better part of their lives at this institution, have much to contribute and want to contribute much, even beyond retirement. This event, does many things, but one of the things it does is it acknowledges the important contribution that emeritus faculty still can make and want to make to the college, to the field, to the education, to change in the world. So I want to thank you for this. This is an important endeavor that the college is involved in. And thank you and all of those who envisioned and have put on this event and this series. This is truly important.
I thank you as well. I'm for that. I am very happy retired. I miss, because I had lots of things. I had that long life of doing things before I became an academic, and I happily returned to doing art and gardening and all the stuff that were my hobbies. And I am lucky in that Sarah keeps me connected to the virtual lab school. When things are going, I've done, I don't know what it's called, consulting. I guess I'm a consultant now. So I do like being connected. I think and I probably would be happy, I hesitate to, this is a dangerous thing to say. I probably would be happy to do more, because I think for me, coming to it later in life, I felt like I wasn't quite over the
Eric, did you hear that?
Yeah, no.
She doesn't stay over the hill. She's not over the hill.
What I meant was I felt like I was still going, I wasn't like I'd come up and plateaued. I had lots going on. But I also wanted to do, other things in my life. And so, it's hard to give up, the graduate students, the camaraderie, the giving, the adding to things. It's also really nice not to have to go to work day, and all the all the bureaucratic things that come with being at the university. So it's going well. I'm happy, but I'm also happy to still be connected with the university.
So now that both of you have a legacy, if you will, and the legacy is not just your work, the students, is there something you would, as you look back and look forward, do differently, given where you are today?
In terms of students?
Yes. Or I'll let you choose the area.
Oh. When it comes to students, I have to say that I feel like I was really lucky, and I don't have probably the legacy that Dave has, because you did it a lot longer than, well, I don't know how long you did it, but I'm assuming you did it longer than me. But the student, I would say the part that I miss the most is working with graduate students. That really was but I can't think of what I would do differently. It was the best part, I think, but I can't think of what I would do differently. I guess I would have done it longer, maybe.
Dave,
I'm reminded of that line from I think it's from a Bob Dylan song. I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now, right? And so I think we want the impossible. I would have liked to have known then what I know now, but I couldn't have gotten to what I know now without having gone through that whole long journey. I think there are, as I look back, there are some things. I wish there were times when I had been braver. And was better able to articulate things that only a decade or two later I learned how to articulate. I think there were some times when I wish I had seen better, right? That I sort of saw and I couldn't really figure out how to name it, and it took me a decade or two to figure that out. But I think that's a frustration we all end up feeling at some time. Or maybe I just hope that I'm not the only one who feels that way.
So you both have an important part of your legacy is your work and the students you've interacted with. Are there other parts of that? You both shared a little bit of your own personal stories today. Are there aspects of that that influenced your legacy in terms of where you see yourself today? You know, we all have a story. We all have a story. You know, there's that famous quote about be kind to everyone because you don't often know the things that they are experiencing in the moment. And so you shared a little bit of that journey for yourself. How does that integrate into the legacy that you're leaving us?
I feel like this is something that's going to take some pondering,
Okay.
Dean.
As you're thinking about that.
Let me think a little bit about that.
So, to say a little bit more about the contributions you feel you have made to the field at this point in time. Where do you see their work as moving forward, given where it was when you started? Speak to that in some way.
That I can speak to because the area that I ended up focusing on, which was on teachers' social emotional well-being and how that impacts children's social emotional health, was really it was just really beginning when I was publishing, doing that work and publishing in it, which made it. Which worked against me, I think, in some of the evaluations of whether I was producing, It was in an area that was new, so there weren't lots of citations, around it that you get counted on, that you're producing work that everybody's citing. It's interesting to me that now, when I'm sitting at home and I still get my OSU email, all the Google Scholar notifications that, this has been cited and it's been cited and been cited. And so it's now something. It's now a much bigger area than it was when I was, when I was actively contributing to it. So it's nice to see that I was there and I was able to contribute on the early part of it.
At its inception.
At its inception.
So how do you deal with that contribution at its inception in the space we now find ourselves, where social emotional learning and that part of what we do is called into question by communities? I don't want to be political here, but they're
you don't want to be political with me because I'll get going.
And so you have the passion for that work, and yet
I do.
And yet there are aspects in today's education, the education of children. You both talked very eloquently about the impact on learning and the impact on the development, and we're in this space where the scholarship isn't necessarily driving the conversation.
Right.
It's more perhaps anecdotal or experiential or
just crazy. Sorry. That is pretty. Yeah. It's really hard.
I'm thinking of the work that you've both done around this area. How do you work in that space now, given that it wasn't always there? David, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, well, the first thing is that in terms of legacy, I don't sit around thinking about my legacy. I don't think I have a legacy. I think I'm part of something that is so much bigger than me. Mm-hmm. I'm glad to be a part of it, but I don't think of it as me, per se. So I think that's the first thing. And then when I look at historically at things over a much longer time span than, say, a decade, I see things that help me understand the key importance of tough intellectual work. I don't mean tough in the sense of hard, but tough in the sense of brave, that I see people all around me doing. Let me give you an example. It used to be the dominant way of thinking that intelligence was inherited until the work of Taylor and Kamen came along, who did the hard work that helped us understand the falsity of the work that Cyril Burke had done in establishing that as the dominant way of thinking. Kamen and Taylor did that hard work that opened that up in all sorts of ways that undermined a sort of view of human beings and personhood that was pernicious. They're examples of the power of the intellectual work that scholars can do. And it's slow work, it's painful work, it's unthanked work. It's work that we do together. It's not work that's going to make you rich. And yet, every once in a while, there come these moments when it all comes together, in which you get a Kamen and Taylor, or you get a Gloria Ladson-Billings, or you get a series of other sorts of moments that change not just the way of thinking and understanding of a few individuals here, but a zeitgeist overall. Kamen and Taylor, that's just one example that comes quickly to mind. Had I known the question you were asking, I would have been better prepared. But that's, and so that's how I think of these things and how I don't get depressed about the current state of things, because quite clearly we've had these depressing states of affair for a long time and in many, many ways. And tough intellectual work, brave intellectual work, keeps pushing back and every once in a while breaks through in wonderful and miraculous ways.
I'm real mouthy. That's how I handle my sense of things. I was thinking that about I can't let things that we know from research, I know the research around early childhood stuff. I know how important it is. And I do things like subject, the person next to me on a plane. We were coming back from Scotland, and a very nice man beside me, very successful. He was telling me about his daughter, and he invited it. I mean, like, I don't do it, just randomly, but he invited, me to talk about my job, and he pretty much got my lecture tonight. By the time we made it across the Atlantic Ocean, and I said to him, he talked about his daughter who was in international law. She was going to St. Andrews in Scotland and everything, and I pointed out to him. I said, I said, I'm sure your daughter's really wonderful, but I said. I said, but I have this sense that, people wouldn't brag about their daughter or their son being an early childhood teacher the way they do if they have some other career. And, I did everything I could to impress upon this man the research around, social emotional stuff and the importance of early childhood. And I thought, I was hoping I was sending him off into the universe so that at some point he may be in a conversation with somebody that would, make a difference in that. So I guess I'm less philosophical and just more of an outspoken woman anymore with just about anybody that I can have a conversation about it.
It just came to mind, so I hope you won't mind. Let me give you another example of not being pessimistic about the current time in which scholarship is sometimes ignored. Let's politely say it that way. I want to talk about a project that myself, Lori Katz, Evie Freeman, who's out there, and a former colleague of ours, Rosemary Horowitz, who unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, have done. When you go into an elementary school classroom and you look at the books that the kids are reading in the, say, a public school classroom, if you come across a piece of Jewish children's literature, it is either a Holocaust book or it is a book that is Hanukkah is the Jewish Christmas kind of book. Evie, Lori, I, and Rosemary have just written a book called Enduring Questions, the Use of Jewish Children's Literature in Classrooms. And the whole idea of that book was to make available and public to people all of the wonderful Jewish children's literature that they could be using, and how to use it, how to talk about it, how to engage kids with it. No one can ever now say that they were unaware. They can say they chose to make themselves unaware. They can say, I don't care. But you can't say now you didn't know. That's one of those pivot points, I think, that changes the dialogue, that changes the kinds of conversations, and moves things forward by increasing, in this case, inclusivity with regard to the kinds of literature that children encounter in the classroom.
Are you going to say something? Go.
No, I'm going to be good.
All right. All right.
I'm going to try to be good.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both for being with us today. I echo the sentiments that you've articulated here of doing this distinguished legacy series. This is something we've wanted to do for a while. COVID entered into this space, and so we've had to think about this very differently. So you've kicked off a very important part of what we do and we hope to do in our college. I hope you've enjoyed this space and the reception that we have received you into this space. As you look beyond this moment, as we wrap up, what do you look forward to? Give us that ray of hope and expectation, given the contribution that you have done as you look forward.
For the world or for the college?
I'll let you define that.
Wow, it's a big concept. So the thing that I would hope that, at least from my reflecting about this, is that I hope there's a greater, I'm not being articulate here. I think the adrenaline is starting to wear off. I think that I would like there to be a greater understanding or appreciation in the academic world of, I don't think everybody has to do it or should do it, but that there's a better appreciation for those who like to juggle practical applications of research with also contributing to the research world.
Translational research is an example of that.
Yeah. So, I think I'll use the virtual lab school as an example. The virtual lab school would be something that has been an incredible, not because I was involved with it, but it's been an incredible contribution to the world, to to the world of early childhood education. And I think it has the potential to transform what happens, not just, we can make the good stuff that happens in the military system happen outside of the military system in our communities. At the same time, if we were honest, in the academic world, a project like that isn't particularly respected when we're looking at things about tenure or promotion or whatever, because it's not pure research, right? And I don't advocate that we abandon having people have good, solid research and publications, but that we also give equal consideration to things that are making an immediate difference in the world. So that's something that I would like to see as people who do that are included in things like this, that happens more in the university. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I think there is much to look forward to, and I am very optimistic as I think about the future, despite all of the ways you could look at things and be pessimistic. But I am just the opposite of that. I think some of that is when I look at the work that younger generations are doing. And by the way, younger generation is anybody 60 and younger. The work is exciting. They have taken work that people in my generation, which is anybody 70 and older, has done and given it not just new life, but new words, new meanings, taken it in directions we couldn't possibly have imagined at the time, and in exciting new ways. I think that's incredible, not just because of what they're doing, but also because of what it tells us about how things move forward. So I think that's incredibly exciting. I also think it's exciting because the institutional world is changing in ways that reflect at least my experience of the everyday world. The everyday world is diverse. The everyday world involves all kinds of people from all kinds of experiences, all kinds of backgrounds, with all kinds of languages. But the institutional world for most of my life has excluded much of that. But now, finally now, we actually have institutions who begin to think, maybe it should be our mission to do something, to make the institutional world reflect the everyday world. Hard work, dangerous work at times, work that probably won't be rewarded, but optimistic and important work. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Thank you both for being here. Please give them an applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.